Hi, everyone. Welcome to Azure User Group Sweden. Happy weekend. Hi, Håkan.
Hello, Rena. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful winter day here in my area. I was in Stockholm, but we got it colder when I got back home. How about you there in Oslo?
Yeah, it's actually I was also in Stockholm actually last week, but it's
Oh,
still
yes, we did
here
meet.
in
Yeah.
the cold in Norway, maybe -10, but it's very sunny and bright.
Yes, 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 yes. All right. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining wherever you are watching us right now, recording or live. And before we start, let me just present Håkan Silvernagel here in Azure User Group Sweden. He is my co-leader. He is Microsoft MVP for AI technology. He is also very active in the community in Norway, especially for AI 42, an AI school for everybody. And he's active in the Norwegian.net user group and as an international speaker, an MCT, and he works as an AI specialist at Miles. And it's an honor to collaborate with Håkan for the past few years in this user group, hosting the sessions.
Yeah, thank you, Jonah. And I'm also very happy and proud to be able to present the founder of our user group, Jonah Anderson. So she's a Microsoft Azure MVP and also Microsoft certified trainer. She's an international public speaker, a mentor, and a podcast host. And in addition to that, she also a book author. She's published on O'Reilly with a really great book on Azure. And in her daily job, yeah, that's behind her. In her daily job, she works as a senior Azure consultant at Solidify.
Thank you, Håkan, for the great presentation. It's good for the first timers to know who we are. That's showing ourselves virtually. But before we introduce our speaker for this awesome session, interesting session today, I would like to share to everyone our code of conduct. So in Azure User Group Sweden, we follow a code of conduct where we expect everyone in the community, the attendees, including ourselves, to be nice and friendly, respectful to everyone or others during our sessions. Be curious and open to share your ideas, and be inclusive in your questions or comments, both in the live chat or even after our session Zoom meetings biweekly. And if you have questions about our code of conduct, feel free to reach out to me and Håkan on LinkedIn. And we would also like to share about our fika. We call it the Swedish discussion that we have virtually, where you can grab a good drink of yours, tea or coffee, and we can discuss about the topic that we have today together with me and Håkan and also our guest speakers. So if you have time, spend the 15-20 minutes and ask questions or mingle with us this weekend. Okay.
Yes, yes. So then we are very happy here to be able to introduce the speaker here for today, Dennis Torres. So let's add Dennis here to the stage. So welcome, Dennis.
Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here on the user group talking to you.
Yes.
Yes.
So yes, I want to give a little bit more formal introduction. So Dennis is a DBA and data platform MVP living in Malta who loves SQL Server and software development, and he has more than 20 years of experience. And he moved to Malta after more than 10 years leading the devSQL PASS Chapter in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, and is now a member of the leadership team of the Malta Microsoft Data Platform User Group PASS Chapter in Malta. So he is organizing meetings, events, and webcasts about SQL Server, and he's an MCT, Microsoft Certified System Expert in data platforms and BI, and with even more titles in software development. And he can be found working for DTower Software and also speaking in SQL Saturdays around Europe.
Great. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you very much for the introduction.
Yes, you're welcome.
So do you want to say a couple of words here, Dennis, about the presentation? What will our audience see here today in your session?
We'll talk about cloud security. Cloud security is a lot of times underestimated. when I worked for big companies, they had the special departments focused on that and good procedures for that. But usually, when I provide services for small consultancies, they end up not even being aware about the need to worry about cloud security. And I even faced situations where a client company outsourced the DevOps work, and the outsourced company of DevOps work was not aware how to do cloud security on Azure. So it's a very underestimated subject. Of course, it's not possible to talk about cloud security on a single session. It's too much. It's too much. So I will follow an example. I will follow an example of an Azure function talking to Azure SQL, and start with everything wrong, and then start putting pieces together and making things right. In the end, we'll have touched the top of the iceberg, but have seen a good view of cloud security.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, that sounds like a great session. I also look forward to that. And by the way, I want to say that I like your background. It looks like you're traveling around the space and the clouds today. So I love the background. Yes, yeah, I look forward. And to our audience tuning in, and some of us, there's one that said hi. Adam said is from Poland. Someone from Poland watching us. Looking forward to your talk, Dennis, and me too as well. So if you have questions, feel free to just like drop them on our live chat. We will keep watching that, and Dennis will answer at the end of the session or when he has time. He will also that in the middle. So feel free to ask questions. All right, are you ready to rock, Dennis? The stage, take the
Yes,
stage.
let's go.
All
So,
right.
can I start?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome everyone to the session about cloud security, secure access from your applications to Azure SQL. So, this is me. Thank you for the user group leaders for the great introduction. They already introduced me. The only additional point are the links. I'm very active on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Maybe you would like to connect, and you'll be very welcome to connect to me on LinkedIn and YouTube. Or if you have any questions about the session subject or other subject, feel free to send me an email. No problem with that. These are some links to connect. And then what we'll talk about today? We'll talk about secrets in app configuration. We'll talk about security problems on an application accessing Azure SQL. Secrets in app configuration, secure standard authentication. Then we'll talk about the usage of SAFC endpoint and the importance of the usage of SAFC endpoint. And then we'll go through the usage of a private endpoint. Uh, Speaking like that, it seems easier than it really is. Let's go to our first function. The scenario that we have is a function which is open to be accessible from the web. And this function accesses an Azure SQL. An Azure SQL which is open to receive access from the web as well. This diagram is simplified. This is not the truth about what is happening behind the scenes. There are some details about how the communication between the function and Azure SQL happens. We'll go deeper on this later. But what's important in the moment is we will start with this function in this way, and this function is doing everything wrong. Absolutely everything wrong. So Let's go to a demonstration. And the first thing that we'll fix on the function is the usage of key vault. So, this is the first function called Cloud Security 1. In order to access the SQL database, this Cloud Security 1 has a configuration here on the configuration area of the function, a configuration called connection string. And this function is doing absolutely everything wrong because it really has the connection string on the configuration of the function. That's something that we should completely avoid. It's an unsafe piece of configuration. So we need to protect this configuration. Before we move forward, it's interesting to mention that one standard practice in security is to apply security on Azure in multiple layers. It's not enough to have a single layer of security. It's important to have multiple layers protecting your app. So when at some point I say, oh, this makes the application unsafe, you may question, oh, but there are other protections. Yes, there are other protections. But if one layer is broken, your application is not so safe as it could be. So the idea is to have multiple layers of security in many levels of access to the application, protecting the application from any attempt of invasion. So the first thing that we fix here is to not hold secrets in the configuration. So what we'll do to fix that? We'll hold secrets in a key vault. So inside the key vault, we can hold our secrets. I have here the com string, the secret. The key vault holds the secret. Some will think, isn't the key vault a single point of failure for our application? No. Every key vault keeps 4 copies of our secret environment. So if let's say that one online key vault fails, there are other copies that will supply our application with its secrets. So we don't need to care too much in relation to this. Every key vault keeps 4 copies about that. Key vault has 2 methods of access. One method is using access policies. What are access policies? The importance of access policies is that what's important to note about access policies in Key Vault is that they are specific to the Key Vault. No other object in Azure share this method of access. So this is a specific access method for the Key Vault. But there is another method which is shared for all objects in Azure, which is called role-based access security. So the Key Vault is also subject to role-based access security. So what is the real method of access that we give to the Key Vault? Access policies or role-based access security? Role-based access security is always summarized as RBAC. So which method do we choose? We have an access configuration. This key vault is using the vault access policy, but this doesn't mean this is the perfect scenario. Usually role-based access security is safer than the vault access policy. I'm just reusing another key vault that I had here. which was configured with vault access policies, so I'm reusing this. But the best option would be to go to role-based access control and give the permission using role-based access control. Okay, so to have access to the resources, we need to give role-based access permissions. To who? To who will give these permissions? We'll give these permissions to our functions. Our functions will need to receive the permission to access the secrets inside the key vault. So we have here a function 2. This second function is intended to start to fix these small problems on the first function. First, let me make a small demonstration. I have here a Postman environment where I can make calls to these functions. So I can make call to the cloud security function 1, send the request, and we'll see the result showing that the result of the function is a list of products. Once the function replies to me with a list of products, the function is working and is working very well. Okay, then let's get back to our second function, which will host the connection string on the key vault and read the connection string from the key vault. I faced many scenarios where the developers thought that they had to make reference to the key vault library, change the code, and read the key vault information inside the code. Don't do that. It's not needed. It's not needed. There is a method of reference which is called key vault reference. Take a look how the key vault reference works. I don't need to put any code in my application to read the key vault value. I put the reference in the configuration of the application. I use @Microsoft Key Vault and I specify the secret URL. How do I get the secret URL? If I go to a secret, for example, I can access the secret, and on the URL on the top of the screen, sorry, let me open a Zoom app to make it easier. So on the URL on the top of the screen, I can see the secret URL. This is the URL we need to use in Key Vault reference. So from the app 02, the Cloud Security 02, I can make a reference to the Key Vault. Would this work? Out of the blue, this will not work. This would fail immediately because my function would not have access to the Key Vault. So what I need to do for the function to have access to the key vault? For the function to have access to the key vault, I need to control the identity of the function. The function needs to be someone. The function needs to have an identity. And once the function has an identity, we can give permissions to this identity. So we can define what these functions will be able to access. So there are two kinds of identity. There are the system assigned identity and there are the user assigned identity. Two kinds of identity. What's the difference of these kinds of identity? The system assigned identity is just an identity that we turn it on. We don't need anything else. We just need to turn on this identity. Only that. Once we turn on the identity for the function, then the identity of the function will have the same name of the function. It's like if a user identity is created inside Microsoft Entra environment. For who has not followed the latest news, Entra is the new name for Azure Active Directory. So an identity with the same name is created inside Microsoft Entra. But this is a special identity. This is a system identity intended to be used as an identity of application. So if I go to Microsoft Entra and try to see this as a user, it's not so easy to locate this Cloud Security 02 as a user, but it exists. And when I want to give a permission to Cloud Security 02, I'm capable to give a permission to Cloud Security 02. That's what I'm doing on the Key Vault. On the Key Vault, on the access policies, what I did here is to add an access policies for Cloud Security 02. Simple like that. The policy is already in place for the function to already be working. If I need to add a policy, I can create, define permissions. See how Key Vault isolates the permissions. I can give isolate permissions for each kind of information that Key Vault can hold. Key Vault can hold permissions to access keys to access some kind of resources, for example, key to access storage, special keys, can be held on Key Vault. I can hold secrets. On secrets, we have the freedom to put any kind of information we would like, or we could hold certificates. So three kind of information that we can hold inside Key Vault, and we can make the permissions very granular. Remind what I said. Security in layers. One of the layers is to make the permission as much granular as possible. So you give the minimal permission needed for each application. That's the idea, that's the intention, that's the utopia and the perfect world. What happens in practice is that managing this gives so much work that is very difficult to find a permission that really implements this correctly. I mean, give the minimal permissions for each application. It is very difficult to find a company that really follows this practice. I'm only giving an example because I'm not concluded that I already have the permissions in place, but the example is that I can get to the next step where I list the principles, and I could find my cloud security apps, my cloud security functions. So I can find cloud security 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the functions that I use during the demonstration. And I could give permissions to one of these cloud securities. Okay, I will not conclude because this account has no need of permission to access certificates. There is no need for this account to access certificates. Okay. So the configuration is done. The secret is on the Key Vault. The cloud security identity has permission to access the key vault, and the configuration has the key vault reference. The key vault reference is especially important because many people think they need to develop the key vault access. They don't need, it's just to put that reference there. You only access key vault with zero code. Zero code. That's it. So, with everything configured and everything is already in place, I can just use Postman to execute the access to Cloud Security 2, and that's it. So see, Cloud Security 2 doesn't have the connection string. Cloud Security 2 is going to the key vault to get the connection string using a key vault reference, which prevents the Cloud Security 2 to have any code referencing key vault. It has only a key vault reference. That's it. Cloud Security 2 is working. Let's summarize this on our slide. First, we had the Cloud Security 1 with everything wrong. Now we have the Cloud Security 2. This Cloud Security 2 is retrieving the access from the key vault. But to retrieve the access from the key vault, it is using a Microsoft Entra ID, an Active Directory ID. So, and there is a process, a complex process of token communication to manage this security. So the function requires a token to the Entra environment to access the key vault. Then sends the token to the key vault, and key vault validates the token with the Entra environment. So it's a complex flow. The result of this complex flow is that key vault never receives any kind of authentication or password. It receives a token which is validated by a third party. This kind of authentication existed before year 2000, was named as Kerberos authentication, and it was first implemented in year 2000. If anyone in the session reminds this name, you are old. You are so old as me. You are quite old. So I would love to hear comments about that. And about the key vault, usage of the key vault, system managed identity versus user managed identity. I haven't talked too much because I went directly to the system managed identity. What's the difference? There is a technical difference, and there are some special scenarios. The technical difference. The system managed identity is independent for each object. Each object has its own system managed identity. So if we use system managed identity, the permissions are extremely granular. So I'm using a system managed identity. So the permissions are very granular. The permissions are specific to this application, this Cloud Security 2. They are specific to this application. If I decide to use a user-assigned identity, I can create a special identity for that. Creating a special identity for that has a specific purpose. What's the purpose? The purpose is that I could manage permissions for many objects. Instead of configuring the permissions user by for each application, If I have many applications which need to have the same permission, I can create a user-assigned identity and set the permissions to this user-assigned identity. Then I share the user-assigned identity among many applications. These applications will share the same permissions. So we have an extremely granular method, but if this extremely granular method starts to give us trouble, we can move to the user-assigned method. This is the strictly technical explanation from one point of view, but I already found companies using other kinds of explanation. What other kinds of explanation some companies used? I saw some companies deciding to use user managed identity even when they were not needed, because from their point of view, the user managed identity were easier to maintain in a DevOps environment. So the DevOps maintenance may also affect the choice of which identity you should use. But this is going way beyond the developer decision. You need a DevOps and infrastructure team to take this decision for your company. You need to understand the reasons and follow the rules. Understand the reasons. Avoid to follow the rules blindly. Then we use the key vault reference. The key vault reference avoided us to use any kind of code inside of our application to tie the application to the key vault. Our application is completely untied to the key vault in relation to code. There is no code related to the key vault. The key vault reference is done on the configuration level. And then we have the access policies versus the RBAC permissions on the key vault. As I said, I'm using access policies only for convenience because I'm using a node key vault. But the best security method is to use RBAC on the key vault. So we are seeing these details about the access of the function to the key vault to get the connection string, and using that connection string go to Azure SQL. Okay, let's move to our next example. Our next example is to use Microsoft Entra ID authentication to also access Azure SQL. If I'm using Microsoft Entra ID authentication to access Key Vault, why couldn't I use the same Microsoft Entra authentication to access Azure SQL? I can, and I should. So this is the error that we have on our Cloud Security 2 application. Our Cloud Security 2 application is reading the secret called con string. This secret con string is an explicit connection string. I'm not seeing the full, oh, here is the full value here. And the point of this full value is that it has ID and password. It's using Azure SQL Standard Authentication. That's a failure in one of the layers of security. User Standard Authentication, I'm not saying that it is completely unsafe. No, the standard authentication evolved along the time and it's very safe. But it could be safer, and we should go forward to safer resources. And that's what we'll do. Instead of using this uh, standard security on Azure SQL, we'll use a managed authentication on Azure SQL. That's what the Cloud Security 3 function app fix. The Cloud Security 3 function apps fix this behavior, changing the connection string it's reading. Instead of reading that basic connection string, standard connection string is reading a managed connection string. It's making the read of a managed connection string. When is this managed connection string? This managed connection string is also present on the key vault. I have it here, the managed connection string. And the managed connection string, if we take a look on it, we take a detailed look on it. The authentication method is Active Directory Manage Identity, saying that I will be using the managed identity from the function app, and there is no password. There is no password at this point. I'm using no password to access Azure SQL. So in this case, I'm using a managed identity to access Azure SQL on Cloud Security Demo 3. Is that easy? No, there are more steps to manage this. There are way more steps to manage this. Let's go to the Cloud Security 3 and see that we enable the system managed identity. Okay, but if the system managed identity needs to access Azure SQL, we need to configure on Azure SQL the permissions for the user managed identity to access Azure SQL. So we need to configure this permission, and we need to configure this permission on SSMS. See, I'm accessing my Azure SQL on SSMS. Let me show that I have the Zoom application here. Sorry, I don't have the Zoom application here. Very sorry for that. So I need to access this using managed authentication. The first step to access this using managed authentication is to go to our database. Our database is here, Adventure Works Legal. And this kind of permission is not set on the database level. Our database, Azure SQL, are linked to a server. So we need to go to the server of our Azure SQL database and define what's called Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra ID. In order for Azure SQL to support managed authentications, we need to give an admin for the Azure SQL. It has to have an admin for Azure SQL, which belongs to the Entra ID. If the Azure SQL is not set with this admin, we cannot make this kind of authentication. It's not possible to make this kind of authentication if this admin is not available at this point. And it's interesting that when setting this admin, I set this admin for SQL admins. It's not a user, it's a group. This is a group, not a user. Yes, If I go back to the Entra environment, here I'm on the Entra environment, seeing the available groups. In fact, I created a group called SQL admins, and inside the group SQL admins, I defined many Azures who will have SQL admins permissions. So it's better to set this kind of permission on a group level than on a user by user level. It's better to rely on the entry environment and set this on group level than on the user by user level. I'll just I'll just quickly mention that if someone in your company blocks your work and say, no, you can't create a group in the Entra environment, I need to manage the groups in the Entra environment, you need to remind your infra guys that there is a feature in Azure Entra environment that allows self-service group managers. So each department manager can create their own groups to manage the permissions based on groups. But this needs to be enabled and allowed to by your infra team. So you can remind your infra team that this feature exists, this feature is there, and it's extremely useful. Okay. Once I have this set, I have the admin set on the SQL Server. It's interesting to notice that we have an option here where I could choose to only access Entra authentication. This is very recommended. I only don't have this option here enabled for example purpose, but in practice, it's very recommended that you restrict the access to your Azure SQL for only Entra IDs, and you can make this configuration on the Azure SQL environment. On the Azure SQL environment, you can restrict the access for only Entra IDs. That's totally possible. And once you make this kind of restriction for Entra IDs, you already set the administrations. We are not all set yet because your application will not use an admin login. You'll be giving too many permissions to your application. And this is exactly what you shouldn't do. You need to give specific permission to your applications, not too many permissions to your applications. So first, let's take a look on the authentication. When I'm authenticating with an Entra ID, I need to use the option Active Directory Universal with MFA. And I only give my login. This is a login who is an administrator of that Azure SQL database. Then I can just connect. If needed, it will ask my authentication. I authenticate. And once I authenticate, I will have permissions to access the Azure SQL. Okay. So one important point is that if I'm giving permissions on my database to access permissions to other Entra IDs, if I'm giving permissions to other Entra IDs to access my database, I need to be logged in with an entry ID. I cannot log in with a SQL Standard ID and give permissions to entry IDs to access these resources. It's not possible. It doesn't work. It simply doesn't work. So, how do I give permissions to my users to access my SQL database? So, let me just open a file here, and I'll copy this script for us to understand better. And then I can create a user. I'm defining the name of the user identity on Azure, and what defines that this user identity will be on Azure is the option from external provider. When I add the option from external provider, I'm saying look for this user on Azure and just give permissions to it. Then I'm giving permissions to the user inside the database. I'm adding the user to the data reader role. And this will be enough for our function. I'm doing this for Cloud Security 3, 4, and 5 because all of them will need permissions on our SQL database. And if you look on security on our SQL database, sorry, I need the zoom tool enabled. So if I'm looking on security on my Azure SQL database, I can see here the cloud security 3, 4, and 5 already have permissions directly inside the database. Is this the best way to do it? There are many variations and I can't go deeper on the many variations possible. But in this case, creating a user on the database, these users will have access only to this database. Another option would be to create the users on the server side as logins. Create logins and then map the logins to users on multiple databases. As it works on regular SQL Server security environment, that's completely possible. That's completely possible. So this is already done. Once this is already done, this means that if I go to the Cloud Security 3 and I execute Cloud Security 3, it works. Cloud Security 3 is perfectly working. So let me summarize this on the slides. So now we have a third function app, and the third function app makes two contacts with the entry environment. One of the contacts is to retrieve a token to access the key vault, and another contact is to retrieve a token to access Azure SQL. So there are two communications to the entry environment to retrieve tokens to access different services. That's what our Cloud Security Function 3 is doing. And we are making it way more secure. Okay. This is the Cloud Security 3. Now, let's summarize this. Azure SQL Entry ID Authentication. Azure SQL needs an admin. I talked about that. Use a group as admin. It's better to have an entry group and use a group as an admin. Function identity becomes a SQL user. We need to go to the SQL and hash the function identity as an external provided user. External users can only be created by Enter ID logins. So you need to be logged in with an Enter ID in order to create external users. And sometimes when I forget this, I spend hours on this. There are two libraries to access SQL Server. There are, of course, there are more than two, but let's limit the subject on two. System Data SQL Client versus Microsoft Data SQL Client. And the most important secret is that if you use System Data SQL Client, the access work, but you can't enable managed authentication. It doesn't work. Managed authentication doesn't work with the library System Data SQL Client. So we need to be sure that your application is using
Yeah.
Microsoft Data SQL Client.
Yeah. Dennis, is it okay if I interrupt?
Yes, yes.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I've been, everyone is like, I'm learning a lot from your session, and I believe our audience watching us right now are also enjoying the session. Great session so far. I'm learning a lot. We do have a question from Paul, from someone from Poland, named Adam from Eden. Can you mix Active Directory IDs and intra IDs when granting permission on DB level?
Active Directory IDs and Entra IDs. I'm not much sure what he means. I need some
Yeah,
clarification.
try.
But
Yes.
but but let me put a guess on this. I would suppose that when talking about Active Directory IDs, he is talking about on-premise IDs. And when he is talking about Entra IDs, he is talking about the Azure
The
IDs,
cloud one. I'm also
the
guessing
cloud
that.
ones.
Yes, I think
Yes.
so.
In this case, I would say mostly no, you can't mix that because there is another solution for that. You need to make a synchronization between your Active Directory and your entities. So each Active Directory account becomes an entity. And from the moment that each Active Directory account becomes an entity, you can give permission to Azure SQL. This is another detail, technical detail, and it would need to go deeper on how this synchronization happens. But the point would be to synchronize the on-premise IDs to the Entra IDs, and then the Entra IDs permissions are given to Azure SQL.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for that. Yeah, we do have. I think the just to add on that, Dennis, I think there's a exactly what you said. There's a service called Azure AD Sync for the
Exactly.
on-prem Active Directory to the cloud Azure AD slash Intra ID now. I think it's renamed also Microsoft Intra ID Sync now. But yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. I hope that answered the question of Adam. We do have a feedback, great feedback from Nico's great session, pure gold. He fought for that. Nico's fought for this for weeks in the same issue. So he's thanking us for bringing
Thank
me
you,
in.
thank you very much, Nikos, and I'm very happy that this session is helping you.
Yes, and you do have a question, as you can see here. I'm not sure if you're able to see the pop up that we're showing, but I can rephrase it. Nico asked, do you recommend using a single user for all database interaction? In what scenario do you see the need for multiple DB users?
Your question depends on a decision that brings a lot of work, and this work should not be managed by developers. So you need to take this challenge to other things in your company to see if other things are uh, willing to get this challenge. What the challenge? The challenge is to make granular permissions. If you want to make granular permissions, so for each app, for each function, it has to have a user which receives the specific permission to what that function needs. So it makes the environment more secure. So, but gives a lot of more work to someone who need to manage that. So your company needs to balance the level of work, how this work works, the trouble, and who will manage this work. So this question is a big challenge that you need to take back to your company to make a decision about the level of permission that will be used to manage this permission.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dennis. I hope that answered your question, Nikos.
Okay. So I was completing the part that in relation to the different libraries. I said that when I forget this point, I stuck for weeks on the system data SQL client, when in fact the SQL data SQL client doesn't work, doesn't provide the managed identity authentication. You need to replace the library, and when you replace the library, immediately the managed authentication is working. And you need the special connection strings. It's not the regular connection strings that you use on premise to make integrated authentication. Forget it. For each kind of identity that you use to authenticate to Azure SQL, you have a special connection string. For example, even if you are using system managed authentication or system managed identity or user managed identity, the connection string is different. So you need to keep in mind some links that will point you to the correct connection string. You need to keep these links to point you to the correct connection string because they vary a lot according to the scenario. You need to find the correct connection string for your scenario. Okay, then let's go to the next challenge, SaaS endpoint. Okay, let me explain technically this next challenge. In order to explain this next challenge, I first show that the Cloud Security 4 and the Cloud Security 5 connections, they are working very well. So I can make the call from them and they are replying. But this is very wrong, and this is the most underestimated point in relation to security. What is wrong is in relation to this? What is wrong in relation to this is that one object inside Azure is accessing a public endpoint inside Azure. What's the risk? I have a slide here to show you a bit about what's the risk and what is really happening. So, this slide, the truth about the access. What you think it happens? You think that your function is accessing Azure SQL and this is fine. You think that this is happening. But since the function is pointing to the public endpoint to the Azure SQL, what's happening? There is an extreme risk that the function pointing to the public endpoint of Azure SQL will cross public internet environment. So you have package crossing the public internet environment. And this is absolutely terrible because you have a lack of security here. You are losing one layer of link securities, of layered securities. So we need to ensure that the communication from the function to the 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 Azure SQL will not never cross the public environment. How do you ensure that? First, let me prove this communication is crossing the public environment. I prove this communication is crossing the public environment going back to the database, the server, in fact. In the server, I'll take a look on the. Let me take a look here on the networking configuration. And here we find a configuration that, please, I beg you, avoid to the most to enable this configuration. Avoid to the most to enable this configuration. This configuration is called allow Azure services resources to access this server, and this is enabled. This configuration being enabled is the reason why I haven't faced a connection challenge yet. Because any service inside Azure can access Azure SQL. But most people misunderstand this configuration. Most people end up thinking, oh, okay, so every one of my Azure services will be able to access Azure SQL, and that's good. No, that's not the truth. The truth is that if you enable this authentication, this option on the authentication, any Azure service will be able to access your Azure SQL. This means if I create another account independent from yours, I create a virtual machine there and try to access your Azure SQL, I'm bypassing one of the security layers. One of the security layers will be completely ignored because this configuration option. This configuration option is not only about your Azure SQL services, it's about everyone Azure SQL services will be bypassing a security layer when access your Azure SQL. That's why I beg you, avoid the most to enable this configuration. So this configuration should not be enabled at all. Let me save this change. Okay. So this SQL Server is not allowing this communication anymore. Okay. This SQL Server is not allowing this communication anymore. Let me close the connection that I have at the moment. Sorry, I don't need to save this because I have it saved in another place. Disconnect. And let me try to connect again to the same service. Client not allowed to access the server. See how things work? Only because I disabled that checkpoint. Only because I disabled that checkpoint is advising me that the client is unable to access that SQL Server. And this has happened from SSMS. Of course, the functions will fail as well. Just for my security, I say that sometimes it keeps some level of cache on this. If I go to function 4, stop and start again, the function 4 will have the same problem as the function 5 is already having. 500 internal server error. So 500 internal server error because the access to Azure SQL is extremely limited. Let's try again the Cloud Security 4 and you see the same 500 server level access error. That's it. Same 500 server access error. Okay, so I can't make a direct access to the server as that SQL database. How do I solve the problem? Many people, when looking to solve the problem, the first look the people look into is to try to open IPs. You can open IP for a personal environment. For example, if you need to access this Azure SQL from your personal private environment, okay, open a permission to an IP. That's not a good deal. But there are many articles on the web that says how you could find the output IPs of the function apps to open the output IPs on the function apps in the firewall rules. Don't do that. This is a terrible practice. I'm not even going into this. This is a terrible practice. Don't go this way. There is another tons of article telling you to just enable this checkbox and everything will work. A magic checkbox that will make everything works and you not notice the consequence. Don't do that. What we should do? First, I need to make a link between this SQL database with a virtual network. Let's make a link. The full net link. Let's make a link to this network where my virtual machine is. I have many subnets. I will make the link to the default subnet first. Okay. When I make this link is created on the side of the VNet as well. I have only this example and one more to illustrate. I think the session is a bit, most of you may think the session is a bit interesting, so maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I'll be finishing. So I established the link. Let me show on the virtual network how this link appears on the virtual network. This link appears as a CFC endpoint. A CFC endpoint created to access Azure SQLs on that default virtual network. So it appears as a safety endpoint on the virtual network. So this was done automatically when I did this configuration. When I did this configuration from Azure SQL, it created that link, then created the link on Azure SQL itself. What did change it? A few minutes ago, I was receiving error from this connection. Now, if I try to connect again, I don't receive error anymore because I just established a private safety link from the network where this virtual machine is to my Azure SQL database. So this private link ensures the communication will passing through Azure. That's something that most people ignore. Most people think, oh, it's working, it's fine. But you need to, when you are concerned about security, you need to think about the detail. Where this communication is really going through. If it's going through public internet, you have a security failure. Okay, I did this and this allowed me to make the communication through SSMS. But how I make the communication from the functions? From the function for example. Function for is a PAS set. And function for until this moment had no connection to that virtual network. So how could I solve the problem? Make a connection to virtual network. When I have the control of networking connection of my Azure function, I can define the outbound traffic of my Azure function. And I can define that the outbound traffic of my Azure function will go out through that virtual network. That virtual network, and most specifically, a subnet that I chose as functions out. Functions out. Connect. That's it. The connection is established. And once the connection is established, I can go back to the Cloud Security 4, which was receiving 500 internal access 0, and send the request. Probably is a bit of cache. It's disappointing when this happens. I need to open the Cloud Security 4. Sorry, you may be noticing there are so many details that it's easy to forget someone. And that's what I just did. I forgot someone. I created the rule only for the default subnet. I need to connect, make another rule, new function out for the function out subnet. I need to put a rule for the function out subnet, which is called a safety link. It will create a safety link on that function out subnet. And once the safety link is created, I add the rule to Azure SQL itself. Look how the Y helps us. It does the two things. It created the rule on the network side and create the rule on the SQL side. Is a UI helping us? If you go to some scripting behavior, this would be way more difficult. And once the rule is established, that's it. I function Cloud Security 4 can access my Azure SQL. So, link is one of the possible methods that allow Azure SQL to be accessed. But it requires Azure SQL to still have a public endpoint. It means if I need Azure SQL to have this public endpoint, okay, that's the solution. But if I don't have a need for this Azure SQL to have this public endpoint, that's not the best solution. The best solution will be to complete disable the public endpoint. Make a complete disable of the public endpoint. At that point, if I try to connect this, cache again. Successfully restarted the app. If it, I'm sorry, some kind of cache is doing this. It should not be enabled, or a cache, or because the link is still here. I could just drop the link and it will drop the connection. I dropped it on the SQL side, but I haven't dropped it on the network side. So let it drop in for a while. Meanwhile, what I want to illustrate is that the best solution is to completely disable public access for our Azure SQL. And completely disable public access from our Azure SQL, I need to create what's called a private endpoint. I created a private endpoint which allows one specific network to connect to this Azure SQL. So where I will create this private endpoint? Let's say that I will use the same resource group as the Azure SQL. Then SQL priv endpoint. It creates a network interface, resource. The resource which will be linked, SQL Server, virtual network. To what virtual network I would to add it? I created a subnet especially for the private endpoint. So I put the private endpoint on this subnet, link it to the subnet. And one trick is that the private endpoints are related to DNS. The private endpoints, they are completely related to the DNS. Let me make an example and hope that this already fixed in the it's already receiving an error. Error 500, as I said, the security 4 is already receiving error 500 because I disabled public access. Then what I should do here, NS lookup. The private endpoint is completely based on DNS. So I can check if the private endpoint is correct or not. If I make an NS lookup, check the address, And if the address gives me some kind of public address passing through public address, then I know that there is no private endpoint. It's trying to reach the public endpoint. And if it tries to reach the public endpoint, it will receive an error. And it will receive a very specific error. It's saying exactly that this Azure SQL deny network access on the public endpoint. I don't have permission to access the public endpoint. So how do I solve that? I complete the creation of the private endpoint. Okay. Create. So completing the creation of the private endpoint, just a few minutes, few seconds, not minutes. Deploying progress. It needs to create a network interface, a private endpoint, and a DNS zone. Because the private endpoint is completely based on DNS to make an internal routing. Okay. So let's prove that this changed using DNS lookup. See here. Now the result is a private address using a private link to the SQL. Private links and private endpoint are tight coupled. One works with another. Then once I did that, if I try to connect again, I can connect. And both my functions, function 4 and function 5, will be capable to make access to the data. There is one detail. On function 5, I also need to define the output of the network. The output of the network, virtual network integration. I need to say that the function needs to access external resources through our private network. So virtual network and our private network. Oh, sorry. I need to choose the existing one. There is one small trick. Once an MCSE plane is linked to a network, I need to keep the same link for all functions. That's what I'm doing. Keeping the same link to all functions. It's connected. And then I'll be able to access the data on Cloud Security 5. In this time, using a private endpoint externally from my environment, I will not be able to access the function. For example, I will not be able to access Azure SQL. Functions 1, 2, and 3 doesn't work anymore because they are not linked to the virtual network. They would receive a 500 error. 500 error because they are not linked to the subnet. Then let's conclude this about self endpoint. Let's summarize this all. Never enable access to Azure SQL. Don't try to guess service IPs for firewalls. Allow private access with what the service endpoint does is to allow private access without disabling the public access. It depends on the public endpoint. If you disable the public access, service endpoint doesn't work. And the functions need a configuration of output. So they go through the virtual network to access your SQL database. This related to the SQL endpoint, to the service endpoint. Then in relation to the SQL endpoint, to the private endpoint, the private endpoint make the access completely private. Once I created private endpoints, I can disable the public access. It's based on DNS resolution, and it doesn't depend on the public endpoint. That's why I can make everything private on this scenario. And then some remarks. This is only the top of the iceberg. Many points that I mentioned are way more complex than that. You need security specialists to deal with everything, but you need to understand these concepts. So if your security specialists fail, you'll be able to complain with them. You avoid your own failures when developing your application. You will know what security your application needs, and you identify failures on underperforming security things. If a named security thing don't make correct configurations on this point, you'll be able to identify them. That's it. Sorry very much for taking more time than expected. I hope you all liked this session. I hope this session added a lot to what you can build in relation to security and your care in relation to security with your applications accessing database on Azure environment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. It's been a really interesting session here. I think you covered a lot of ground. So at least for me, I have to rewatch this to get all the details here. It was a very interesting session.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dennis. It was also, I was like taking notes some of your key key takeaways for each of the categories. I really like it. I think it's something that I will be applying also in my project. So I work closely with the database team as well in the infra part. So very great session. I believe our audience as well are saying things on your session. And to those of you that want to ask more questions with Dennis, we will be having an after session Zoom meeting that's very casual, and you can interact with Dennis or us as well if you have further questions that you specifically want to ask him. Great. Dennis, I removed your presentation. Do you have anything else that you want to share to our audience, talks coming up, or any initiatives that you have for the community that you want to share?
Next week, I'll be talking about Microsoft Fabric on the Power BI and Fabric Summit. And I have two talks related to Microsoft Fabric. And one of them is extremely interesting because it's about the application of data mesh on Microsoft Fabric. It's a proposal of new architecture and some new ideas. It makes the session extremely interesting. And I will also do this session in person. Maybe some people will be on just a train ride from there. I'll be in Pordenone on the end of the month. delivering this session in person as well. So next week online on Power BI and Fabric Summit, and then on Pordenone in person.
Okay. That's great. Awesome. Feel free to follow Dennis on LinkedIn if you have questions related
Sure.
to these topics, and also he will be joining us quickly, briefly on our after session Zoom meeting as well. Anything else, Hokan, Dennis, that you want to say before I we end our
Th-
session?
Thank you very much for everyone who attended. I hope you enjoyed the session. Thank you very much for the invitation. And I'm available anytime you would like. Give me a challenge about a subject or suggest a subject, and I'm available to come back.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I loved your session. I was like smiling and learning at the same time backstage. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Yes, yes. So, Hokan, anything? Last
No,
words?
thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you.
Yes. All right.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everyone, for your time. See you again in 2 weeks. And by the way, before we end, we want to share that I think this last week, Hokan and I did a video about our call for speakers for Global Azure. So in April, we are joining Global Azure for the first time. Like all communities are talking about sharing knowledge about Azure, and we are joining. So feel free to submit your session. We will select them before the scheduled time, and we look forward to seeing you also in the next 2 weeks. So have a great weekend, everyone. Bye bye.
Have a great weekend.
Bye bye.
Bye.